Termina was not a dream. The game creator stated that Termina is a real country.
The whole what if Termina was in real narrative is old and retarded.
Sorry mate. Termina is a real place,
Your
and it
bullshipping
isn't up
theory
for
about
debate.
Termina not being real was just the
Why do you keep on the dream hypothesis when he
is a
also
real
stated
place,
that
and he
Termina
was a
is a
stupid
real
game
place?
theory.
Alright, that's enough. I get it. Many of my fellow Zelda fans don't say with a theory that the plot of Majora's Mask didn't literally happen, and that Termina isn't a real place. But I have one question to ask everyone who insists that what we witnessed during Link's journey through Termina is literally what happened. Can you truly debunk the Termina isn't real theories? Believe me or not, this isn't even a taunt. If anyone has even stronger arguments than the ones I'm going to address soon, please be my guest to tell me where I'm wrong in the comments. But for this video, I've gathered a list of arguments for why I believe the plot of Majora's Mask occurred all in Link's mind, and making counter-arguments to the most common refutations I've seen for my theory. Before we delve into it, I'd like to clarify that the purpose of this video is not to prove that Termina isn't real, but instead to prove that the theory is at least plausible. If you don't agree with some of my arguments, that's perfectly fine, but please hear me out before refuting these ideas. My theory essentially states that nothing we saw in Majora's Mask, from Link getting robbed by the Skull Kid through him returning to the woods, wasn't real, except for the flashback of Zelda and maybe the final scene with the drawing of Link and the Skull Kid on the tree stump. I know some just don't have an open mindset to even listen to the arguments I'm going to make in this video, but I at least hope to do my best to convince those who are open-minded about why I think my stance on the lore is valid. If you end up enjoying this video, I'd appreciate it if you take the time to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Without further delay, let's begin! These first couple of points on my list are going to be far longer than some of the others, so I'm going to get them out of the way first. This first point is the most common thing I hear from people trying to instantly shut down the Termina isn't real theory. So many people claim that Eiji Aonuma himself said in interviews that Termina is a real place, and so has the game manual. I can understand exactly where this perception is coming from, but claiming this as an absolute truth is just wrong. In fact, out of all the transcribed interviews I've found where Aonuma or another official producer has been asked if Termina is a dream, they've never explicitly denied it. They may have not necessarily intended for that to be the case, but in reality, the game was very rushed and the devs may have not had as much time as they would have liked to fully flesh out the story of the game. Nintendo also loves to let fans come up with their own perception of the Zelda games, and this is especially true of Majora's Mask since the provided story is mysteriously ambiguous. And although Aonuma has never explicitly confirmed whether Termina is a real physical land or a dream world, he has said on record, "We had this very different image for the world where we imagined Majora's Mask to take place. You know, we described it as a nearby land, but in feel, it's almost like another dimension." What I find fascinating about this quote is that he says it was initially described as a nearby land to Hyrule, but also says it's almost like another dimension or world. As far as I've read, the only official sources I've found that describes Termina as anything like a nearby land are both the United States and European versions of the Nintendo 64 game manual and the Hyrule Historia, all of which refer to Termina as a parallel world that is similar to and yet different from the land of Hyrule. This is usually what people use to prove that Termina is an actual physical land and not some imaginary place made from Link's or even the Skull Kid's minds. But this doesn't necessarily prove anything. Provided by Dictionary.com, the best fitting definition of a parallel world or universe given this context is a realm of existence and experience that is fundamentally different from the one that most humans share, or more simply put, a separate reality. If it's not already clear, this is a very broad term and thus can have different interpretations. Those of you who insist Termina is a real land usually interpret a parallel world like the Dark World in A Link to the Past, or Lorule from A Link Between Worlds, where the geography is a mirror image of Hyrule but distorted and corrupted. Or alternatively, others consider Termina just a distant continent on the same planet or plane of existence as Hyrule, similar to Labrina and Holodrum from the Oracle series, or New Hyrule from Spirit Tracks. The problem here is that Termina is very unique and contains so many bizarre elements that make it uncomparable to any of these. In a way, Koholint Island from Link's Awakening is also a kind of parallel world. Just because it was created from a dream and ceases to exist when the dreamer wakes, doesn't mean it doesn't count as an alternate reality. So technically speaking, If Termina were to end up being a dream, after all, it would not contradict any canonical information. It just branches from different interpretations of the same story we all know and love. I know this reasoning may trigger some since it really just comes down to interpretation, but the overall point here is that we can't use one specific interpretation of a developer's words or a single sentence from the manual and act like that one interpretation is the absolute truth when it allows for other possibilities as well. Maybe it's just me, but the opening sequence events in Majora's Mask just feels off. After doing my analysis and research, I've realized that Link's journey through Termina has uncanny similarities to the classic story, Alice in Wonderland. In the original story, and in most adaptations, the story begins with Alice outside and suddenly spotting a white rabbit with a watch dart by. She then chases it down the famous rabbit hole, which leads to many bizarre experiences and ends up taking her to this strange and chaotic new world. The intro to Majora's Mask follows a similar sequence. Link is wandering through the woods, when suddenly he is knocked off by his horse and is robbed by the Skull Kid. Link then chases the Skull Kid into a hole in a tree where he falls and has an acid trip experience. At this point in the story, Alice shrinks and grows into various sizes without knowing anything about what's actually going on. Likewise, Link is transformed into a Deku, which is completely out of his control, and is forced to aimlessly chase after the Skull Kid. Alice eventually comes to realize she's no longer in the world she knows, and Link finds himself in the same boat. He travels through a corridor that takes him underneath Clocktown, the center of this strange land of Termina. This is the point in the story where the different adaptations of Alice in Wonderland have varying events, which makes it difficult to linearly go through the plot and point out all of the parallels with Majora's Mask. However, the two-part 1985 adaptation of Alice in Wonderland has a strong plotline which helps it correlate a lot better to Link's journey. It would take an entire lengthy video to establish Link's relevant background, so for the sake of not getting too caught up in this Alice in Wonderland portion of this list, I'm going to share a link to an article written by Dathan Bakabella on Zelda Dungeon down in the description, which, in my opinion, does an excellent job summarizing the plot to the 1985 adaptation, relating it to Link's experience in Termina, and analyzing how Termina could be representative of Link's trauma from Ocarina of Time. The end of Alice in Wonderland always ends with Alice waking up where she was at the beginning of the story, and realizing everything had been a dream. Of course, all past similarities between the two plots don't mean that Termina also has to be a dream as well. But it is a fascinating coincidence, and I do have other reasons to suspect that Termina was a series of post-traumatic dreams Link had after departing Hyrule, which ties well into my next point. I've seen so many people complain about how retconning Termina as a made-up world is just lazy and ruins the story, but I think it actually gives it so much more meaning. In my previous video called The Tragedy of Time, I told the story of the hero of time from a perspective that acknowledged the trauma he must have experienced. As part of this, I interpreted the events of Majora's Mask as a series of traumatic dreams Link had after departing Hyrule. If you haven't already watched this video, I highly recommend you check it out, and you can find it here or in the description below. To me, Link's adventure through Termina means so much more as a journey to coping with his own grief than merely being another parallel world that we'll never see again. Another prevalent point used to prove Termina's existence is the hero's bow Link obtained in the Woodfall Temple, which appears to be the same hero's bow that becomes acquired by the Hero of Twilight. People use this as proof because it implies that the Hero of Twilight's bow originated from Termina, but this isn't actually true. When the Hero of Twilight obtains the hero's bow in the Goron Mines, the game text says, "You've got the hero's bow." This Goron treasure once belonged to a hero of legend. The bow does indeed resemble the one found in Termina. However, the Hero of Time was not known as a hero in the child timeline, so making this assumption is a huge oversight. What many don't realize is that the legendary figure this bow belonged to was actually the first hero in the timeline from Skyward Sword. The design of the bow seems to almost fit perfectly. It doesn't make much sense as to why the Gorons would have had the Hero of Time's bow when he died unexpectedly. Technically, there could be some explanation to this not seen in the games, and I support everyone's liberty to fill in the gaps for their own headcanon, but the same looking hero's bow even appears in the Wind Waker, which is in a separate timeline from Majora's Mask. We know that the events of the Wind Waker were real, so it doesn't really make any sense as to how this bow could have ended up in this mystic land of Termina in one timeline and the Tower of Gods in another timeline. Maybe somebody really creative could come up with some story for how this could be possible, but for these reasons I've just told you, I don't think it's probable for the bow found in Termina to be the same hero's bow in Twilight Princess. In the Snowhead region in Termina, Link finds the Lens of Truth. There are a couple of things that don't make sense about this. The Lens of Truth is a unique Sheikah artifact, but the Sheikah supposedly don't have any presence in Termina at all. Secondly, Link had already obtained this item from the bottom of the well in Kakariko Village, so how is there another one in Termina? Technically, we could make up some way to explain there being multiple in existence, but then why wouldn't Link already have the lens? In terms of gameplay, it's obvious because they didn't want Link to have all the equipment he gathered in Ocarina of Time to make the beginning of the game balanced, but this shouldn't impact the lore. The same concept applies to Link needing to relearn the Song of Storms. It makes little sense as to why Link wouldn't know the Song of Storms anymore, then suddenly relearn it from a strange character in a parallel world. If Termina was a construct made from Link's mind, then the lens would have been something that made it into the dream from his memories. This alone isn't enough to justify Termina is a dream, but with more arguments, it really stacks up. One thing that always bothered me with the ending of Majora's Mask is how Link manages to leave Termina. He just rides off and somehow eventually ends up back in the mysterious woods he was in before the first encounter with the Skull Kid. Like, how the heck does he manage to leave Termina? The only known entrance was from falling down that hole in the tree and then having an acid trip experience while walking through a corridor. Even if Termina was real, falling down a hole to get to Termina is a one-way road, and there isn't any other implied way to leave. I already talked about how the beginning of Majora's Mask has parallels with Alice in Wonderland. If Termina was a dream or series of dreams Link had, this would be another commonality. There are certain versions of the story where Alice's dream is a journey for her to mature and discover her own identity, which perfectly aligns with my narrative from the Tragedy of Time video, where Link's adventure is actually him learning to deal with his own grief. The overall theory makes far more sense than me just saying, somehow, Link found a way home. So if everything that happened in Termina was just a dream, then how does Link have the Mirror Shield and Gilded Sword after he got back to the woods where the story began? In my theory I published nearly 2 years ago, I claimed that even this scene was still part of a dream, and this is right before Link would wake up and his journey of self-discovery would come to a definitive close. I'm aware that this may seem like a lazy explanation to some, but I think that if this is Link's journey of self-discovery, this closing scene where he returns to where the story began is symbolic of Link having learned to address his grief. At this point, some may be wondering if there's any scene in the game other than the flashback of Zelda I think was actually real, and I say there may be one. The final scene after the credits zooms in on a tree stump with a drawing on it. It clearly depicts Link and the Skull Kid with Tattle, Tail, and the giants behind them. A common assumption is that this was drawn by the Skull Kid, but it's more than likely drawn by Link. The Skull Kid appears to stay in Termina for the carnival, and we know that Link is already in the woods. It is also drawn on a stump, a good place to rest when one is journeying through the forest. After completing his metaphorical journey, Link may have decided to draw his experience on the stump before continuing his journey. This idea even fits Link's personality too. In Ocarina of Time, there's a drawing on Link's house which depicts someone fighting a large creature. Unless the Skull Kid or some other random character drew this on Link's house in Kokiri Village, it was most likely drawn by Link. On the contrary though, this drawing still can be used for either side since it's really dependent on the interpretation of the entire game, but I hope it's clear how this can't be used to debunk the dream theory. Because the land of Termina has such a rich culture, I understand to a degree why many have a difficult time subscribing to any theory claiming Termina isn't real. I have read a handful of comments which say there's no way someone could come up with that entire world in just a dream, but I think that's not true at all. First of all, I think it makes more sense that Majora's Mask was a series of dreams, not a single one. Most people have experiences with recurring dreams that take place in the same or similar setting, start off the same, but follow a different chain of events. Sounds just like Link's trip through Termina to me. Saying that someone can't make up all this complex lore in their sleep is just ridiculous, both realistically and in the lore. Koholint Island from Link's Awakening was a bit more lighthearted and silly, but nevertheless, all the characters felt real, yet it was still a dream. Furthermore, The subconscious mind is far more creative than the unconscious mind because it lets our memories and thoughts free from our perception of reality. I know personally, I've had dreams where I've been in these completely bizarre areas unlike anything I've ever known. Sure, they have elements inspired by what I'm familiar with, but they're still something entirely new on their own. So saying that Link couldn't have made up this world in a dream doesn't really have much grounds for it, considering how dreams work and the fact that it's been done before in another Zelda game. The final thing I need to address is the concept of Easter eggs. It's actually insane that I've seen multiple comments mentioning how Majora's Mask is a DLC item in Breath of the Wild, or it appears in Link's house in A Link Between Worlds, so the mask must be real. This logic just baffles me because it makes absolutely no sense in the lore. Using this logic, all other DLC items and amiibos must be part of the story in Breath of the Wild as well. This would include the Salvager set, which is a crossover with Xenoblade Chronicles 2, or the Goddess Sword from Skyward Sword, which is eventually forged into the Master Sword. Interpreting the presence of these items in the gameplay as a part of the story makes no sense, and as a community, we need to understand the difference between Easter eggs and just for fun gameplay elements from the actual story and the lore of the franchise. The only example up for debate, I'd say, is the engraving of Dermani at Death Mountain in Breath of the Wild. The main significance of Goron Mount Rushmore is Daruk. It doesn't make sense how there would be a memorial of a Goron from Termina in Hyrule when Dermani had never made an appearance in Hyrule. Personally, I think this one is still an Easter egg, but I respect those who feel otherwise. I think this example can go either way, but I wanted to clarify that the DLC items and appearances of Majora's Mask in A Link Between Worlds and Breath of the Wild don't mean anything to the lore of the franchise. These are the reasons why I consider Termina to have been Link's series of dreams, and why I think the theory is at least possible. If you still disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. My main goal was to hopefully increase the general understanding of my theory and explain why it's not as easy to shut down as people might think. If there are any other arguments to be made to prove Termina is real, I'd love to read them in the comments. In fact, if there's enough information for me to make another video to address them, I'm open to those as well. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as any support goes a long way. Thank you all for watching. Zeldom out.